Welcome back, everybody. By popular request, I have decided to start a series of YouTube videos for, drumroll please, underwater portraiture. That is one of the biggest questions that I get asked, and that being able to provide some information on the subject is sorely needed. So I am here to start it. So this is going to be an introduction to underwater portraiture, part 1. Now, while this field is very large and I could literally talk to you about it for hours, I want to keep it fairly simple and brief so that you can take the information, marinate on it, and decide if it's something that's good for you and your business. So first and foremost, I want to discuss the difficulty level of underwater portraiture. So that is not me just saying that it's hard because I don't want anybody else to do it, because honestly, I feel like we need more underwater photographers. But that is me genuinely saying it is difficult because it is 100% one of the most difficult fields of photography I have ever done. Whether we are in the pool or in the ocean, obviously the ocean, that difficulty level goes up times 100, but it is a difficult session all the way around. It is almost 3 times as long as a typical session with me, which is about an hour and a half of shooting time. So let's kind of jump right in. So there's a few things that I kind of want to break down and debunk, if you will, about underwater portraiture. So first and foremost, yes, we are actually underwater. Well, that's one of the biggest questions that I get from potential clients is, are we actually in the water? And the answer to that is yes, hence the name underwater portraiture. It is not shot on a green screen. We are 100% in the pool or in the ocean, depending on what we're photographing. So the next thing that I want to talk about is, because we are underwater, you do obviously need to know how to swim. Not only do you need to know how to swim, but you need to be very comfortable with the water. You need to be able to tread water, and you need to be able to hold your breath. Not for an extended period of time, but you do need to be able to hold it for at least a good 30 to 45 seconds. Why is that? Because eventually you are going to be teaching your potential clients how to pose, how to breathe, how to prepare them for being underwater, being photographed underwater. So to do that, you have to lead the way in your comfort level and your knowledge of underwater. Now, depending on the field that you're photographing is going to depend on the information that you are going to give your potential client. For me, because I specialize in maternity, motherhood, and underwater portraiture, but that motherhood and maternity tend to go underwater as well, there's a lot of extra safety issues that go along with that. So depending on the field, again, you could be photographing seniors, you could be doing a wedding couple. There's going to be different safety issues with every niche field that you would be doing underwater. So we're going to kind of cover just the basics. So again, number 1, they need to be able to know how to swim. You need to be able to know how to swim, and you need to be able to know how to swim well. Number 2, you need to be comfortable. If you are not comfortable in the water, do you think your clients are going to be comfortable? Probably not. Now, let's move on to number 2. So another very popular question that I get asked a lot is there a way to just try underwater portraiture? So here's the thing. Underwater portraiture is one of those fields where your gear actually makes a huge difference in the quality of imagery that you produce. Now, in the beginning, if you're just trying, obviously the quality is not necessarily the most important thing because you're just trying to see the difficulty level. You're trying to see if it's even a field you want to be in, right? So there's certain things that you can do when it comes to gear that's going to be on the cheaper side. However, if you're wanting to just maybe rent the gear, that's a very, very new concept for underwater portraiture because each housing is made to fit the camera itself, the lens that you use, the body that you use. So for me, I actually use the Canon Mach 4 for my underwater portraiture. I do have the R5, but they have not released the lens that I want yet because I photograph very wide underwater, which we'll talk about that, of course, a little bit later. But because they don't have the lens yet, I can't have my housing built to fit my camera yet. So for now, I use my Mach 4, which is a phenomenal camera to use underwater. And my housing company is Icolite. I Love them. We'll talk about the housing a little bit more as we go on. But when you first start out, and I'll be honest, I actually started with one of the cheapest things that you could do, which was just a $60 bag off of Amazon. Now, please don't confuse me. I do not encourage you to use this bag because it's never guaranteed. It could leak at any moment. The reason that I was comfortable using it was because my gear was older anyways, and I knew I had to replace my camera soon. And most of my work in the beginning was just me practicing with people underwater anyway. So it wasn't a client that I could potentially lose images from. But I started with just a $60 bag off of Amazon. But another way that you could potentially try it is using a GoPro. So GoPros are really popular, and it's not necessarily money that would be wasted if you decided not to do underwater portraiture, because you can use them on vacation. They do work underwater really well, so you would get your use out of it for sure. Now then there's housings that are kind of in between. So you have the very professional higher end housing, then you have the super cheap stuff that's not safe, and then you have a middle ground. There's several companies that are kind of right in that middle ground that aren't too expensive, that will allow you to physically be able to put your camera under the water fairly safely. I don't want to say 100% safety, because even with the most professional gear, sometimes things can still go wrong. But in the middle, you still have some safety there. I wouldn't encourage you to take it in the ocean, but you would be okay to take it in the pool just to get a good feel. Now, the housings that are right in the middle that are not too costly are still going to be very difficult for you to reach your settings on your camera, and being able to reach your settings is a huge part of the process. You need to be able to adjust your settings accordingly, especially because the lighting is not the same, obviously, as when you're photographing on land. So that's going to bring me to my next point. When you are photographing underwater, the minute that you take your camera underwater, you immediately lose light. Even if it is a full sunny day, you lose light the second your lens goes underneath the water. So imagine, if you will, that you're photographing on a full sun day and you have your settings set to be able to photograph with that full sun, but then a cloud comes over. You have to be able to adjust your settings very quickly. So with those housings that are right in the middle, they're kind of made out of like a rubber silicone. It's very difficult to reach your settings, but it would serve its purpose in being able to at least see if you even like the field. Because if you were to invest in the very expensive professional underwater housing, to only decide 2 sessions in that it's not made for you, that's a bit of an investment that you may not be able to fully get back. So there are ways to try, but it is a little bit more difficult. It's not like doing something on land and you want to test out a lens and you can rent any lens or any body or even any lighting that you would like to use. It's a little bit of a different playing field, but there are some cost-effective ways to at least get a good feel for it. The next thing that you're going to struggle with when it comes to underwater is lighting. So we kind of talked about it just a little bit. Like I said, the minute that you go underwater, you lose light. That's to be expected. So another popular question that I have is, do I use strobes or do I use ambient light? So 99.9% of the time, I use ambient light. So if you were to go through my website or my social media pages and see any of the underwater images there, almost every single one of them was used with the light that was given to me. Well, why is that, Karen? Why is that the case? Because I know you love using off-camera flash when you're on land, so why would you not have strobes for underwater? Well, the answer to that question is, biggest one is because the strobes are actually very, very large, and it's very cumbersome to work in the pool with these very large strobes. First. The second thing is the strobes for underwater are not built the way that the strobes for on land are built. What I mean by that is the wattage of power or the wattage of light that's coming from those strobes is not the same as on land. So if you are trying to compete with the sun with those strobes, they're not powerful enough to do so. Those strobes are specifically meant for maybe like a deep dive in the ocean where you have almost no light, not enough for your camera to pick up, and you are using those strobes to light the area there. So that's typically what the strobes are used for. Now, we have to remember technology is getting more advanced every month, every week, every minute. So it's not to say that strobes are not very soon going to be able to light or compete with the full sun that you have. Now, you may be wondering, well, why would I want to compete with the ambient light? Well, it's very similar to being on land. When you are photographing in very harsh sun and you don't have any off-camera flash, what do you get? You get very harsh shadows. The same thing happens when you're in the water. If you have sun directly above and it's full sun, no clouds, you're going to see ripples and lines all over your subject. Some photographers don't like that at all. For me, I actually do like it. I love being able to see the lines and the ripples that are created because of the sun. For me, that shows that we're underwater, and it's part of the whole point of being in the water. I personally do not like my images so overly edited that you can't really even tell that they're in the water. So I actually like those lines. I love the ripple effect that the ambient light gives me. However, if a client maybe did not like that ripple effect, but they liked my style in general, then I would use strobes to lighten those ripples some. But it's never going to fully light your subject enough to fight the sun. They're just not powerful enough yet. Not to mention, because of the size, it's very difficult to move with ease the way that you should be able to. Now, when you are in a pool, you're working with a very limited amount of space. So it is not uncommon for you to be able to need to be able to move around. Those lights do make it very difficult to do so. Not to mention it is very heavy, but funny enough, it's heavy when you're out of the water, but when you're in the water, your housing will actually start to pull you up, which is another problem that people don't even think about when it comes to underwater portraiture. So now that you kind of understand a little bit about the housing and the gear, which again, like I said, we're going to actually show you the housing in part 2 of this so that way you can kind of get a good feel of what to expect. But now that you kind of have an idea of where to start, if you do want to kind of get a good feel for underwater to see if it's for you, also understanding how lighting works is going to be a big part of it. Now, there's only so much that I can physically say about lighting, but we do plan on releasing a few videos in the near future where we are actually going underwater together so that you can see how that light is affected. But for now, being able to explain it to you, the most important thing to remember is that you lose light quickly and that the strobes that they have for underwater housing is not enough to compete with full sun. So you do need to be able to reach and have your settings accessible with whatever housing you choose if you decide to actually you do this as a career and make money from it. That's the only time that investing in that housing is going to make sense. So we have discussed safety, we have discussed gear, we have discussed lighting to the best degree that we can without actually being in the water. Now let's talk about being able to get started with understanding how people's bodies work with underwater. So what most people think of is when you go swimming, you hold your breath, you jump in, you do a few paddles, and you come right back up for air. Underwater is the one time that is actually the opposite of what you need to do. So one of the biggest hangups that people have outside of the other complicated things we've already talked about is the fact that when people get in the water, they tend to kind of just bob up at the top. I always get asked, Karen, how do you get your clients to stay underwater? How long are they underwater for? So, quick answers to these questions are, 1, it's in my training. I train them how to breathe. If someone is holding their breath, that air is naturally going to make them float. So they actually have to push their air out so that they are able to sink. Now remember, because I work with expecting women, that is a bit more complicated than just saying it out loud, because what's happening? Their belly is being separated because they're making room for a growing child, right? So being able to push all of their air out is very, very complicated. And again, depending on the field of photography that you plan to do underwater, it'll depend on how you teach your potential clients. But you do need to be able to teach them how to get their air out, and so that they can properly sink to the bottom. Now, here is the thing. Every single client is different. Some people can get their air out very quickly and they sink to the bottom very fast. That can present its own set of issues. Other people have a very difficult time getting their air out and they tend to kind of hover right at the top. That has its own set of issues. You need to be able to coach your client to know the right amount. Now, for me, with pregnant women, it is not good for them to hold their breath for an extended period of time. So the question that I get asked is, how long do they have to be under there? We are only underwater for a few seconds at a time. Believe it or not, we are only under there for a few seconds. That is it. The other thing is, how do I get them to go to the bottom? Well, like I said, I teach them how to breathe properly. It's actually almost like a Lamaze class. So if any of you have ever been to a Lamaze class, it's a series of deep breaths that they do. So I am actually helping them not only be able to have an amazing session, but I'm helping them with their upcoming delivery, being able to breathe through those contractions too. Being able to breathe and let that air out is what helps them to sink. I do not ever put weights on any of my clients, whether they are pregnant or not. Some people might do that. I do not personally agree with it, because for me, it is a safety issue and safety always comes first. Nobody's life is worth an image. No matter how amazing that image may be, it is not worth somebody's life. When you add weights to someone, no matter how comfortable they are in the water, no matter how good of a swimmer they are, it is an added weight, it is an added risk. So I do not weight any of my clients. I have been known to weigh myself down because I'm a little top heavy and I'm a little bottom heavy. And if you have more fat on your body, you are known to float a little bit more. So I do tend to weight myself on occasion, especially if I'm in the ocean. But that is the only person that I weight, because I know my skill level. I can guarantee my skill level. I will never put weights on any client of mine. Now, I can't tell you not to do that. I can encourage you not to do that. I do not think that it's safe. And if there is anyone out here who is considering doing a underwater session for themselves, if the photographer is considering putting weights on you, please be careful. I do not think it is safe, but let's keep on moving now that I've made that very clear. So what have we learned? We have learned that yes, there is a way for you to test it out without having to fully buy the gear, but understanding that the professional gear is going to give you the best results possible. The next thing is you need to be comfortable with swimming. You need to be comfortable with treading water and holding your breath. Why? Because you will be initially teaching your client, no matter how comfortable they are with the water, you are having to reteach their brain with how to swim, because it's exactly the opposite of what we are known to do. How we've been growing up holding our breath and swimming, we're teaching them the exact opposite. And then third, you need to understand how lighting affects you. Understanding that the strobes that are available can help a little, but they're mainly used for if you're doing deep diving. Expect that when the moment that your lens goes underwater, you will be losing light. And then fourth, for me in particular, with my niche field of photography, with expecting moms, I do not ever weight them, and they are only underwater for a mere few seconds at a time. Another important thing is I always have them speak with their doctor, just to make sure that they are okay to go in the water and they understand that they are doing an underwater session. If you have a mother who is severely sick or was diagnosed with hyperemesis, which is extended morning sickness, they would not be a good candidate. If they are high risk, they would not be a good candidate. Understanding and knowing all of these details about whatever niche field of photography you plan on photographing underwater is vital. So start with those few tips. get to playing around underwater, play around with people who are very comfortable, who know how to swim. Know that you actually need to empty your lungs, go down under, because otherwise you'll be bobbing up at the top. And also be prepared that your underwater housing might make you float as well. Those few tips will at least get you started and at least give you an idea if underwater is a good field for you. And we will be back with part 2 very soon, discussing the gear in much more detail. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you guys again soon.